Because of the way that I deal with my notebooks and the way that I read ahead, this week is going to be a little bit of a longer update. So I cleared all of Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 simply because Chapter 10, the problems, the problems in Chapter 10, at least the early ones in almost every section, were problems that were already in Chapters 8 or 9 in specific sections of those two chapters. I mean, in the book, Chapter 10 is sort of like, do it if you want to. So I did. So in reality, when I worked through Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 problems, these I worked. And actually, I got, I don't know if the word is stuck, but I spent a lot of time on section 9.3, problem number 5. I think I did the proof wrong, so I'll have to go back to it at some point. But then these problems that are marked in Chapter 10, most of them weren't actually done because they're identical to a problem somewhere else in the previous two chapters. So that's that for chapters 8 and 9. 9 and 10 problems. I already drew up chapter 11 and chapter 12 for doing those problems. Then of course, I'm in week 15, and I finished chapter 11 today. So I'm something like 6 weeks ahead in the reading, which is good. I want to do that so I have some time in June. I think I'm probably going to be in here by June, I hope. Somewhere in June, July, I can do a bunch of problems. And then, of course, I finished chapter 11. So I did these 3 sections this week. Section 7 was fairly long. So that's my progress for that. Now, in the case of Rudin, I did look very briefly, so I'm going to mention it just as briefly. So chapter 9 is the one that's got differentiation, R to the n. So chapter 9 in Rudin has the content for chapter 11 in Wade. Of course, being Rudin, he goes places that nobody else does. Rudin uses a lot of linear algebra formalisms to underpin what he discusses in R to the n differentiation. He also goes into some topics that are also not in Wade, and this is why I do believe that more that I read in Rudin, the more that I want to someday, perhaps next year, go through this book the way that I've gone through Wade. So actually read the book, try to understand all the concepts. So for example, I'd never heard of the contraction principle. And it looks like Rudin's inverse function theorem proof is different from the Watt and Wade. So that's interesting. He uses radii. I don't remember Wade doing that. And then the implicit function theorem also looks like Rudin did his own thing. So I think I'm going to visit that. And I see a really nice example in here. Typical of Rudin having very good examples. The rank theorem, he goes determinants. There's a lot of linear algebra that Rudin put in, then derivatives of higher order, and differentiation of integrals. Very interesting topics. So definitely something for next year, maybe even something for later this year. So to my notebook, of course, there's a lot more to cover because I've got all of chapter 11 completed in these notes. Let me line it up at the top. There we go. Okay, great. So I did do some problems in chapter 9 and chapter 10, mostly chapter 9, and they went okay. Nothing special to mention there. I did a coverage that I consider to be on the light side because I wanted to get to 11 and 12, and I want to spend a lot of time on 11 and 12. That's just me. It's a first reading cycle. So that's my cop-out. And so really when it comes to chapter 10 problems, I did some that were different from the ones that were in 8 or 9. But then when they became the same, I just noted, yeah, okay, so I did these problems before. Then chapter 11, and again, this particular notebook, which is the third one, is already beginning to do the bend thing. So I already ordered another one of these floppy things so I can cover chapter 12 and beyond. So yeah, reading through chapter 11, everything went well up to, and I'll mention it. So I went in and I really did understand the content, partial derivatives, and all these various uses of the mean value theorem for derivatives, all ways in which you do integrals in different boundaries, and then the use of this t function that is equal to the slope of a linear line, and then you put it in, and instead of doing the limit that you typically do for a derivative, which is f of a plus h minus f of a over h, you really make that not equal the derivative, but you subtract out. This t function is really that derivative, and so of course the limit is always going to be 0, and you play with this concept a lot. Then eventually that function becomes a, when you go to r to the n, the slope becomes the Jacobian, and it's a matrix. And there it is. There's your Jacobian. There's some ChatGPT examples, useful. So yeah, more of the same concept. Now with gradients, so actually now the gradient is the Jacobian, is the B matrix, translates in one dimension to that t function. Then examples, very good examples from the book. Then when it came to differentials, also I understood that. I went in and I looked at some videos on differential geometry. Very few, but just to get what the wedge product was all about. Even though it's not discussed at this point in time, I wanted to understand it. And then at some point things started getting difficult. So chain rule, pretty straightforward, understood the material. Then when I hit right here, this is my wall. And so when I come back to this material, when I do problems, I plan to do a lot of research for this particular part of the chapter. This reminds me a lot about the power series section. I'm just going to have to do a lot. When I went through it and I followed as much as I could, when it got to the way the formula is laid out, I honestly didn't truly understand where all the factorials came from in the result. I sort of get it because I understand the Taylor formula in single variable calculus, and I even looked up some examples. I got to the point where I went and I found something on the web, a section with somebody who had a lot of examples, and yes, I got the examples. But this thing of 1 over p factorial over the derivative, pth derivative, and over j factorial summed, I don't get this right now. So right here, this is a hole right now in my learning. I got to go back and dig it deeper. When I do something simple, I get it. When I look at the formula, I don't really. Not really. Went to Marsden and Trumba, did a little bit of vectors from Marsden and Trumba. Plan to do more of that. Then when I got into the inverse function theorem, I encountered also some difficulties in understanding the proofs. I traced them out as best I could, trying to map where things went. This whole part of the chapter, sections 11, 5, 6, and 7, scream, revisit, research, handout, all that good stuff. But I did finish the reading, at least the first reading, and I get the examples. I just, when it comes to the theorems, I haven't really wrapped my head around how they work. I know what's going on, but not really. Like, I really need to understand this matrix and why B is here, and why the identity matrix is here, why the zero matrix is here, and why the gradient matrix is here. I just need to understand why this matrix was made. I don't right now. I know that when you have a one-to-one function, if you do the function that way, you invert it, you get back to where you started, and you can go back and forth any number of times. I get that. But once it is put in this formalism, I'm a little lost. So screaming, revisit this whole part of the book, these last 3 sections. Even though the examples were okay to go through. The second derivative test, I understand it in one dimension. I need to understand more of how it plays out in vector calculus. So there's going to be a lot of looking up for those. Yeah, quadric surfaces, went and read the appendix, Appendix D. And this was straightforward because there are examples. Yeah, the part about the Lagrange multipliers, I understand that. I've done Lagrange multipliers many, many years ago, so that's fine. But yeah, so the tail end of 11.7 is okay. The part in implicit function and inverse function, the theorems, those two, got to revisit. And also Taylor formula in R to the n.